Hey, we're in a series called Devoted, and we're going to hop into this idea on really God's devotion to us and ours back. But I want to give you a couple key dates. If some of you are detail people, can I just totally nerd us out for just a second? Are you all right with that? So coming up on the 16th, 3:16, you can remember that because of John 3:16, is we have a work day that's going to be happening at our church from 8 to 2 in preparation for Easter and just making this place look great. How many of you would say you want your church to look good for the guests we have on Easter Sunday, right? So we're going to do some work to just get some things taken care of, and like anybody cleans up their house, it's time for that big spring cleaning. So if you're interested, let that be a great serve opportunity. Just show up. It would be some fun things. But Sunday night, the 17th, the day after, we're going to have a prayer and worship night that's going to happen right here at 5:30, and it goes till 7. Now, Sunday mornings, we get to worship and do all those things. But because of service times and kids and all the dynamics that goes on, it's a little bit more structured, where a prayer and worship night gives us a little bit more freedom to be expressive in our worship and to lean in on some topics and also begin to pray and kind of lean in for what God's going to do throughout our Easter services. So I want you to know about that on the 17th. And then jumping to the 29th, Good Friday, by the way, we're going to have a 7 o'clock Good Friday service right here on our campus. And for some of you, you have a tradition of Good Friday services. That will be a fun night where we'll look through kind of the reading of the Passion story and walk through that. It'll be a time of communion together as a congregation. And then we're going to come back to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on Easter morning, the 31st, with 3 service times. 9, 10:45, and 12:15. And you need to know that because it impacts your service time, so much. 10:45 happens to be the largest guest attendance time in our church. There's more guests that roll in. And to make room for guests, it means some of us, I'm going to ask that you would join me at 12:15 to finish out strong. And so if service time does not affect you, and it doesn't need to be 10:45, if you can at all join me for 12:15, I'm going to say, please do so. And it's going to be our faith step, believing that God is going to make room for more people at 10:45. How many would say we want to make more room for people at our church at Easter? I love that. So come and join me at 12:15 if you can, and let's have 3 dynamite services here that day. So good, got all of that out of the way. Let's jump back into the topic of devoted. We opened our series with this key statement: we're all devoted to something. Everyone's devoted to something, and we know that. Matter of fact, I could grab my phone right now and take a picture of this room, and take it of the entire room, and if I showed it to you, you would look at one person first. Any guesses on who? Yourself, that's exactly right. And if it was a good picture, the only describing factor for you would be is if it's a good picture of you, you would think it's a great picture no matter what anybody else looked like, because we are so devoted to ourselves. Maybe you remember going to a small school event for your children, maybe the band or something like that. And when you got there, of course, you saw all of the kids, but who did you watch attentively to? Your child. That's right, because you're devoted. We're all devoted to something, but what we pushed it further to say is what we seek first, we're devoted to. The very thing that we do, the thing that starts. And so last week we even took it to saying, hey, it's taking God first and placing him at the center. And from the overflow of him at the center, it affects everything else. And today we're going to keep that concept going. In fact, we're going to find ourselves in the key passage we looked at, and it reads this way. In Acts chapter 2, 42, it says, and all the believers devoted themselves. If you're taking notes, would you underline that statement? They devoted themselves. They made a commitment. They had an opportunity and they leaned in, committed to the outcome, focused for a common good to get to the end. And this is what they did. They committed to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to sharing meals, including the Lord's Supper and to prayer. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those that were being saved. If you're taking notes, would you circle the Lord added to their fellowship? Now, when you read this passage, it's the first kind of time that the church is coming together. This is the earliest church that's being formed. It's moved from temple environments to gatherings of early believers that have bought into the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And that story is growing. And when you read this, it sounds so utopia, like it's so perfect, everything's great, and it's all smiles. But you need to know that when we read that last line, it's where everything gets messed up. Because when it says that God added to their numbers, what it really meant that it was adding to the church was problems, issues, addiction, hardship, challenges. Because where there's people, there is problems. Matter of fact, if you walked in today with problems, you're in a safe place because we all have them. I mean, you walked into a place where some of us are dealing with hardships, struggles in relationships, difficulties, issues within families, struggles with finances, hardships with potentially a lawsuit or something going on, because where there's people, there is problems. And so early on in the church, already, God was beginning to work on hearts, which is how do we be devoted to each other to get to the end, but recognizing that there will be challenges and difficulties and hardship. Aren't you glad that God made allowances for that? That coming into the Christian life, we didn't have to just be perfect or have it all together. We could walk in recognizing that we all are a mess. Think about it in this sense. How is it that the people that love us the most are the ones that also have the ability to hurt us the most? I mean, they know our weak spots, right? They know what to say. They know what issues we've been dealing with. Like when the fight gets like they're losing, they know what to bring up in our past or our family to go for it because they know our weaknesses. They know our vulnerabilities, our insecurities. And it's amazing how the people we love the most can hurt us the most. When I was growing up, for me, it was my older brother. We're 4 years apart, and so that meant when he was 16 and kind of getting his independence and his driver's license, he had to tote around his 12-year-old younger brother. And to be honest, that's not very cool. And so all of a sudden, like when we were younger, like there would be huge differences and we would argue it out. But when I was really tiny, my older brother would pin me down on the grass and sit on my stomach and chest, hold my arms down with his legs, and tickle my nose with a piece of grass. And I'll just tell you, I hated it. I hated it. I would do everything I could to kick and to get out of it. But with him being 4 years older than me, there was not much I could do. But you just need to know that God was so good because about the time I became 17, I could take him. But now by the time you're 17, and of course now he's 21, it's not like we're physically fighting it out, but he would know what to say or I would know what to say to really go at the heart. And the person that I grew up with, literally shared a room with, was also the person that had the ability to hurt me the most. How is it that a spouse can say something that can go right to the core of us and wound us? There's some of us in here that are carrying somebody, either the person next to us or an ex or a previous boyfriend or girlfriend said years ago. And to this day, the thought of it still is so real because what they said, it goes to the inside. Yesterday in preparation for today, I said, babe, I'd like to share this illustration. Are you cool if I share this? And she said, no. I'm like, what? She's like, that is way too raw, way too real. No, you can't share that. So please know before I share any story of us, I always get permission. But on the other side, can we just agree there's some things that are still raw in our lives? There's conflicts that we're still working through. We're all going through this because we have the ability to bring pain and to push all of that pressure into a tender spot. A couple of weeks ago, Becky and I had the chance to go on a cruise, and I shared a little bit about it 2 weeks ago. We hopped on in Fort Lauderdale, and the weather was pretty nice as we got off the boat, but for the next 5 days, it poured. We would go to different ports to hang out, and it was dumping, and the water was so rough, almost all the activities were shut down in different parts. At one point, Becky and I are on a beach at Turks and Caicos. We're laying on these loungers, and Becky is holding an umbrella to keep the rain off of her in her chair, and I'm just laying there just taking it, right? You ever been there? You don't even have the energy to hold up the umbrella. We're just getting soaked. So this happens for a few days. Well, the last day of our trip, we make a stop in the Bahamas. And I will tell you, I've never been in the Bahamas. The sand was like a powder-like texture. It was so beautiful. The water is like this turquoise, unbelievable color. But there's a problem, which is my white body and the sun don't mix. So, before I actually go in the sun, I have to stand in the shower and sunblock. Just coat it. And if my feet aren't weird enough looking already, they're like bleach white. So, it's just like this part of preparation. Well, we make our way out to the beach. We've been there maybe 5, max 10 minutes, and we get 2 little chairs with some little covers, and I'm trying to get them situated. And in the process of doing that, I'd just taken my shoes off. I kicked something underneath the sand. And have you ever stubbed your toe, and it went to instant pain within a moment? You know what I'm talking about? And in the process, I don't want to say anything, so I'm like pacing back and forth, and the pain level is rising. And I notice Becky, she's just laying out her towels like nothing's going on. And I'm like, what is happening? I look down and I can see every place that I had walked because there is a red footprint following. And I said, babe, I think I need stitches. So she turns around, she's like, oh my goodness. She grabs a bottle and pours it on my foot, and I recognize that on one of my toes, there used to be a toenail. We haven't even sat down yet. We literally are trying to get situated. I have to find like a first aid person that's gonna give me a kind of a look. They realize they can't do anything there. I need to go back to the boat. It's like the little bit of time at this beautiful beach. We walk in there and they say, hey, you're gonna be home tomorrow, so what we think we need to do is just to kind of lightly clean it and wrap it up, and when you get home, have your doctor kind of take a look, maybe do x-rays and do what you need to do. Now, because I'm like just wanting to get back to the beach, they're like, we can let you go back, but you need to sign this piece of paper before we let you out. You know what I mean? Like, do go through all this stuff. Now, why is that situation the way it is? Because direct pressure in a vulnerable place can bring unbelievable pain. And we know that to be true in so many places in our life, that if we are not careful, direct pressure brought to the wrong spot can be unbelievably crippling. It can be damaging to a relationship and to a life. And because of that, God gives us instructions for how to manage this thing, relationships. And so I want to lean into that really quick. And I want to start by saying this, the truth about all people, that all people deal with conflict. I recently was told that some people are great at conflict, and that in my mind just makes me think, then you're in way too much conflict, right? Like if you're in it so much that you've become good at it, maybe you just shouldn't be in it as much. But the reality is you get two people together for any amount of time, you're gonna have conflict. Siblings are gonna have conflict. Marriages, work environments, best friends. And so what do we do when conflict happens? Because there's a couple things we need to grab onto. The first one is this. We need to recognize that some relationships don't survive conflict. That sometimes something will happen and it'll be so real and so unique that it'll never be able to recover. I grew up with a next door neighbor that became a best friend. We were in the same grade. We grew up as schoolhood friends. And matter of fact, 1 year of college, we were college roommates. But way after that, there was a circumstance that happened, and it involved his girlfriend and some money, and some things were said and done. And to be honest, even though we had 20 years of relationship together, the next 20 years have been distanced. And we've worked really hard to try to bring some healing and some help, but it broke some things. But how is it that some relationships can get severed by it, but other relationships can actually be strengthened by it? Conflict can strengthen certain relationships. I mean, that was the scenario with my brother and I. As much as my brother and I were battling it out, really distant because he would go away to college, but all of a sudden when my mom passed away, when I was late in high school, it was the thing that reconnected my brother and I. Now, years later, my brother and I will probably chat 3 times a week, just checking in and have an incredible friendship. But that came through pain and hardship. But those things were strengthening. I know certain marriages, the conflict issues is what separated them. But for other marriages, it's the conflict that drives them closer together. And this conflict can do both sides. Well, we also need to realize that unresolved conflict can actually impact our spiritual lives. I mean, think about it in this sense. It's really hard for me and Becky to be on outs and then me to be like all close and tight with God. Right? Because when we're in relational conflict, it overwhelms our thinking, our time, it dominates our thoughts and our attitudes, and it all of a sudden makes us want to isolate. So rather than drawing towards God, it actually creates distance. And so we've got to manage this conflict thing. But we also need to realize that all conflict can be resolved. Now you go, well, Ben, you don't know the conflict I've gone through. And let me just start by saying this, that God is a miracle-working God, and if He can redeem us, He can redeem any relationship. I've even seen it happen when one of the two people in the conflict issue has already passed, and somebody has gone back to do the work in their heart and in their life to restore and redeem where there was a previous debt to make that relationship right. I even know circumstances where they've gone on to have conversations with that person's kids and family to bring healing to others, even in the midst of it. Because This idea of reconciliation is always available through Christ. Well, if it has the ability to separate, it has the ability to strengthen, it affects our faith and it can be redeemed, then why wouldn't we lean into, when conflict happens, addressing it in the right way? And so I want to talk about that for just a moment as we look at what God's word says in this area. When we were in our last series, we used this statement that new behavior requires new beliefs. And it was found out of a verse, Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Verse 1 would say that we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. 2 would say, be transformed into a new creation by changing the way we think. And then all of a sudden, it'll hop into this beautiful passage of how we're to love. And it's really found verses 9 through 21. And I want to unpack that for us today because I think it'll be helpful in how we're to love and care for others. Not based on us just being good people, but based on how God loved us. It opens by saying this way. It's not going to be in your notes, but it'll be on the screen. It says, don't just pretend to love others, but really love them. It means be authentic and genuine. Don't be hypocritical in your love. Have you ever had somebody tell you the right thing and maybe the smile looked good, but it just didn't feel right? You could just sense something wasn't all there. This passage is talking about the attitude of our hearts. It says, do this right. In fact, love in such a real way that you would hate what's wrong. How unique that it would open up a passage on how we should love, and it talks about hate as kind of the opening piece. And it's not talking about a person. It says hate what is wrong, not hate a wrong person. It talks about things that should stir our hearts. I mean, think about it this way. When I hear about injustice, when I hear about trafficking, when I hear about oppression, when I hear about hatred, these are things that should stir an emotion inside us to be like, those things aren't right. And that's a loving response to direct us to the thing, not the person. And then it unpacks it so beautifully. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but hardworking in serving the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been told virtue, or patience is a virtue. It's just a virtue I don't have. I mean, I'm not a patient person. I like buying Becky gifts, but I hate waiting for the day. I'm like, do you want to know what it is? You want me to show you? Like, we'll rewrap it, because I mean, when when you find the great gift, like, come on, you want to there's that part, right? Like, patience is a tough thing. But I'll tell you that when you deal with conflict, patience is a piece, because sometimes things have to be processed and walked through and journeyed together. It needs time to marinate. And verse 13 then says, when God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Then all of a sudden, 14 is going to wreck us when it says, bless those who persecute you. What it doesn't say is persecute those that persecute you. Hate those that persecute you. Feel cool keeping those people at a distance. No, it says bless those that persecute you. Don't curse them, and then pray that God would bless them too. You need to know that when this was spoken, it was so countercultural to its time and to its era that all of a sudden Paul's teaching as an expression of Christ's love would say, this is living opposite to the world. This is living completely counter to what's going on. Let me give you an example. If I was to look back on the last 20 years of our presidents, my bet is in the last 20 years, there's at least one you didn't like. Now, some of you are like, I can tell you 3 or 4 I didn't like. I'm not asking that. I'm just saying my bet is there's at least one that had different viewpoints or attitudes or responses in a way that you were rolling through. What this verse doesn't say is that you need to be all about what they're about. What it's saying is that you're going to pray a blessing and favor on them based on the position they hold, because their position has influence and impact on you. So that means that looking forward to our next election, I can trust that whether or not the person is who I want, I can pray and believe that God could use them to let his purpose and plan go through, even if he stands for things I oppose and I'm different than. And I can honor the role in the position even though that we're at a difference. This is a tough topic, because how do we care and love and believe favor over a boss who has values that we don't agree with a neighbor who makes life hard to live next to? Not only is it tough to just tolerate them, we're saying no, to pray a blessing over them. But look where it'll even push further. Be happy with those that are happy and weep with those that weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. And don't think you know it all. And then 17, never, never, never pay back evil with more evil. Do things in such a way that everyone will see that you're honorable, and do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. I love what it says, do everything you can do. Because recognize that no matter what you do, there are a certain group of people that you could do all the right thing and they're just gonna be bothered. They're gonna hold you at a distance, they're gonna have attitude, and there's nothing you can do. So you're gonna do your part and trust and leave the rest up to others. And then it'll push forward. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. And do not let evil conquer you, but conquer it by doing good. This is a challenge. This is loving at another level. And this is not loving because we're good people, but this is loving because this is what God has done for us. And God's saying, if you'll be this to others, conflict, division, arguments, and strife will go to the side because this genuine love is powerful. So how do we use some wisdom to navigate conflict? Well, let me give you a couple ideas. The first one is that we would begin with humility. And it's this, that we would understand the condition of our own hearts. That we would recognize that our own hearts are challenged. Now, many times when we see people, we want to judge the condition of someone else's heart versus recognize the condition of our own. So what do I start with when I mean the condition of my own heart? I begin with this statement: I am the most broken, fallible, messed up sinner I know. Now, you go, well, Ben, you don't know what I've done. You're right, I don't, but I know every thought that goes through my mind, and when I understand that I am broken, then I don't live with the expectation that everybody else needs to be perfect because I'm perfect. But when I start with the fact that we're all broken and we all need Jesus, then when I meet somebody that's broken too, I'm not like, oh, that's a big surprise. No, we're here. Jesus is the standard, not Ben. Jesus is the mark that we're working to. So in Matthew 12:34, it would say this: from the abundance of our heart, our mouth speaks. Our mouth will speak what the heart is full of. It comes out of us. So realize when all of a sudden I'm in tension and conflict and my pride shows up, what I'm really just saying is that's what's inside this heart. Now, when conflict happens, there's a regular theme that will take place for Ben. Now, I can't speak for you. It could be a little bit different. But at first, I do my very best to manage it. My bet is that you do too. So how many of you know to count to 3? I had to give up on counting to 3. I got to go to like 40 when I'm mad, right? Like I got to add more time. Like I'll do like breathing techniques. They tell you to breathe, but when you're mad, you're like this. Like people know your nose is like getting huge, right? This whole part, like they can feel the tension. But for me, when I'm fighting conflict, when I feel attacked, there's a negative response that happens in me, and I immediately become defensive. And if it stayed at that, that would be one thing. But the problem is, as soon as I become defensive, I quit listening. Now you go, well, why is that important? Because when I quit listening, I start thinking of what I'm going to say next and how I'm going to rebut what you just said versus understanding what you're saying and feeling. I'm now just switching into defense mode. And as soon as I quit listening, I get loud. All of a sudden, my voice level goes up, and when I get loud, that's when I start hurting other people with my words. And when I hurt other people with my words, I recognize that I'm hurting others only because my own heart is hurting. It's this cycle, and it all of a sudden begins to unfold in this part, versus if I start with the fact that, wait, inside this heart is a hurting heart, and other people are hurting too, and let this be a bridging thing to start with. I have to recognize, wait, I've got to humble myself by elevating people and put us on the same level, versus going, wait, I'm right, you're wrong, come to me. Humility. Do you recognize, rather than Jesus going, wait, I'm God and you all be perfect, come up here? No, he humbled himself and took on flesh and took the cross we deserved so that we could be on equal levels at the cross, because he recognized we're hurting, we're alone, and we needed healing. Wow, that's our starting part, humility. But it doesn't just stay there, it then moves to self-control. Recognize this, that impulsiveness kills reconciliation. We have to slow down. We've got to listen and walk through the process. In James 1:19, it says, you must all be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Listening's not a great strategy for me. I'm not great at listening. I'm great at talking, but horrible at listening. But recognize that when that happens, we have a response. We've got to take some self-control. Recently, I heard somebody say this statement: I feel like I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. That's a horrible plan. If at any moment your mind tells you don't say something, don't say something. Let me just help you even a little bit further. Just because you feel it doesn't mean you should say it. Just think if you acted on every one of your feelings. Instead, we've got to recognize how to respond. First, don't respond out of reaction. Instead, pray and respond appropriately. But also, seek to understand, not to be understood. So for me, rather than just sharing my part, it's beginning to ask questions and drawing this out. What are you feeling? What's going on? How do we walk in this? And then lastly is this key part, that I need to listen more than I speak. And if I speak more than I'm listening, I'm losing. That's a unique thought. Like if I'm gonna just dominate the conversation, I'm losing versus starting in the midst of conflict and opening my ears and opening my heart to what's going on with the other person, because the goal of conflict is to create connection, not distance. So I gotta practice self-control. But it not only needs to stay at self-control, it needs to move to gentleness. Gentleness is choose words that have the best chance to being heard. Now you would go, well, Ben, shouldn't you just pick truth? Because people just need to hear the truth. Yeah, if they're listening. But if they're not listening, it's just truth that no one's hearing. Please know this, you have the freedom of speech, but you do not have the right to be heard. Being heard is earned. And so you can say whatever you want. It doesn't mean the other person's listening. To give you an idea, Becky and I have never been in an argument, and all of a sudden, Becky just stopped and was like, Ben, thank you so much for just getting me straightened out. I mean, I was wrong. And now that you've told me the truth, we're way better. And I just love you, that's great. That has never been happened. You know what I have heard? You're an idiot and a jerk. I've heard that a lot. So in this sense, if you have the right or the choice between being right or being kind, pick kind. Because if you pick kind at the right time, you'll have the opportunity to be right. But you could be right and be alone. You could be right and sleep in a different bed. You could be right and have half your stuff. It's just realities, right? Do you want to be right or be kind? So how do we practice gentleness? I love in Proverbs 18:19, it says, arguments separate friends. Do you recognize it doesn't say hatred? It's simple arguments, simple quarrels that if we don't manage the little stuff, it creates distance. Having friends is hard. Creating friendships is hard. Don't destroy them. Believe it or not, I'm actually great at destroying stuff. I love doing home projects, and I'm best at the demolition. Now, it's incredible because demolition literally happens so fast. Like, to remodel a kitchen could take months, but you could do the demo in one day. My favorite two tools of all the tools is a sledgehammer and a sawzall. Like, it is incredible what you can do. I remember going into our kitchen in one of our old houses, and there was countertops, and literally just taking this giant sledgehammer and just destroying all of it. Tile floor. I mean, this was so healthy. But we got to a section where there was a piece of wall that was going to come out, and I'd done all the work to check the plugs and make sure the right circuit breakers and all were off, because I've regularly shocked myself on projects. Whenever I change wall sockets or wall switches, I do it with oven mitts on right now because I still to this day shock myself. Now, in this day, I had a sawzall. I was cutting a wall out to open it up, and Becky and the girls are there, and Becky about 4 different times is like, are you sure you know what you're doing? I'm like, yes. I watched YouTube. Of course I know what I'm doing. And so I got this sawzall out, and I drew the lines of where the doorway's going through, and as I got partway through the wall, the saw wasn't continuing to go. So I did what any good guy would do. I just pushed way harder. And all of a sudden, sparks go flying. All of a sudden, smoke's coming out, power, it hit the main circuit breaker on the entire house shut down. What I didn't know is that this wall held the major electrical line that went through the rest of the house, mainly to the AC unit. Now, here's the crazy part. When all of this happened, I yanked the sawzall out of the wall, and the shock actually melted the blade in half. Half of the blade was gone. So I did what any good pastor would do. I called an electrician in our church and was like, can you help me out? But man, now here's the part I land with all of that. Do you know that you don't have to repair what you don't break? Do you know there are so many projects in my house that I've had to repair because the demolition went way further than what it needed to do? Do you know there's relationships in your life that you're trying to do repair in areas that never had to be messed up? You walked in and took a sledgehammer and a sawzall when you could have had a simple conversation or done a little planning, and instead there's years of work trying to repair what never had to be broken. And in a moment when you could have held a little reserve, when you could have been a little patient, and instead you said, nope, I'm feeling it, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and you took another swing, and now years later, rather than having a conversation, it's done through mediation. Rather than enjoying the response of doing a project that brought fun to a family and to a home, actually divided a house. See, we don't have to repair what we don't break. How do we walk into life recognizing that most often gentleness is what God is trying to draw out of us? And next is integrity. Integrity is what we are going to own ourselves and recognizing that we also have mistakes. And I am not going to wait for the other person to say sorry before I say sorry. I'm going to own my own stuff. In Matthew chapter 5, there is a passage where Jesus says, hey, if you're getting ready to do a sacrifice and you remember that you've wronged somebody, go first and make it right and then come back and sacrifice. And it's this amazing part because what he's really saying is forgiveness is greater than sacrifice. When you ask somebody else to forgive you, when you bring healing, you need to know that far more is going on than you guys just becoming okay. It's healing of hearts and lives, and it affects the other person too. So what is the integrity, what I'm going to own? Now, the hard part is there are circumstances where we're like, Ben, but I didn't do anything wrong. Ben, if you knew the story, it was totally them. Ben, if you knew what was going on, but I'll tell you, when I own the attitude of my heart and my response, it opens up the opportunity for healing. Now, you need to know this is an area that I'm not great at. When I feel wronged, I so badly want to correct. I want to point someone's finger at where they wronged me and everything else versus stopping and going, wait, guess what? I'm a mess. I own my part and I come together with this. Let's move towards healing. Well, it doesn't just stay there. It also moves to then forgiveness. And I love this about forgiveness, that forgiveness can be both asked for and offered. It's not just something that is one way, but it is a two-way street. In Luke 17, verse 4, it says, even if a person wrongs you 7 times a day and each time turns again and asks for forgiveness, then it says 3 words. Would you read it with me? You must forgive. Would you circle that? You must. Now, some of you are going, well, what is this person doing? I mean, because it almost sounds like we're enablers. It kind of just sounds like we're just letting them do wrong over and over and over, Ben. This just seems like bad advice. And what this passage is saying is, guess what? Them wronging is a reflection of them, but your forgiveness is a reflection of you. And if you're not careful managing the you part, it will show up in every other relationship. Because once you shut down forgiveness here, it shuts off the stream to forgiveness in all the other places. So something that happened between you and a parent years ago shows up in your marriage, shows up in your parenting, shows up in your work life. But when we go back and bring healing to that, it brings healing in all the other places. This is something that we've got to own, that we have a healing that God has to do in this inside part. What if we actually made the decision right now that no matter what, if anyone ever asks for forgiveness, we're going to offer it? Because guess what? It's a choice, but what if you made it before they actually did anything wrong? That no matter what it is, if somebody asks me for forgiveness, I'm going to choose to extend it, even if it's tough, even if it's hard. And you go, well, Ben, why? Because it's what Jesus has already chosen to do for us. That no matter what we do, he's already extended grace on the front side. He says, I care so much about this relationship. No matter how many times you come, no matter what you do, I'm going to offer it. So in John 13:34, it says, love one another. And then it says, how? As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Don't do this out of obligation or just to be a good guy. Do this in response for how Jesus has loved us. And every day we make him promises and we let him down. We tell him we're not gonna do it again, and then we do. We say we're gonna try harder, and then we fail. And he says, I don't care, I forgive you. Just keep coming. Just show up so that rather than distance, there can be connection. Rather than hurt, there can be healing. And he leans into it. I remember getting to that boat, back to the boat with my foot. I'm hobbling onto the ship, and I make my way into the little infirmary. And when I walk in there, they say, hey, rather than us do this here, it's probably better for you to go back to your hospital when you get home and just mess with it. The problem is I needed the next day to get on a flight, and I needed to roll luggage and everything that was going on. And the problem is that the toenail did not come completely off. And so how was I going to be able to put a shoe on or be able to move through an airplane or an airport when this thing is flopping? And so I asked them the question, well, can you trim it or do something? And they said, I'm sorry, we can't, but you can. Now that's a tough spot because you have a response of what are you going to do? Now I'll tell you what I didn't do. What I didn't do is just say, you know what, while I'm at it, let's just take all the toenails off so this will never happen again. You know what I didn't do? I didn't say, do you have a large knife? Let's just take the whole toe. You know what I didn't do? Hey, I'm gonna give up on all beaches forever. You know what I didn't do? I didn't let one negative circumstance destroy all the rest. But when it comes to relationships, if we're not careful, a bad managed conflict can show up in every other place. And so what has to happen is that you're willing to go through a momentary moment of pain so that healing can begin to happen. And that God can begin to restore and things can get put back together. And even though there's temporary hurt, we don't give up. And why do we not give up? Because we're devoted. And when we're devoted to God, we have to be devoted to God's people. And if God loves us and he loves them, then we are too, even though they're going to hurt us, even though they're going to let us down, because we're going to do everything in our power to let more people come into the King of God, knowing that we are welcoming in problems and challenges and difficulties and different viewpoints and attitudes and responses, because collectively, we are God's church, and we're devoted to it. Can I pray for us? Dear Lord, I thank you for the privilege of sharing your word. Lord, the fact that you would even allow a person like me, a hot mess, to share their life, and the fact that you show up in the midst of our weekend, our worship and our environment to let your word be expressed. I pray, Lord, that this would be a church where nobody has to walk in and fake it to have it all together, that this is a safe place to have problems, to be open about conflicts and struggles and issues. That it is not a place that we just come in and we just say, this is who we are and we're just gonna remain there. No, we come into this place broken and we find healing and hope in the person of Jesus Christ. So Lord, I recognize that in a room this size, there's some challenges in relational conflict. There's marriages, there's relationships with children and with parents, with siblings and family members, employees and with neighbors that need your help. And so rather, Lord, than just do a miracle and restore the relationship, I'm going to ask a little bit different prayer. Lord, would you do a miracle in our heart that allows us to love in difficult circumstances? Let us be the miracle. Let us show up with genuine love and affection. Let us serve, give, bless, and help. Let us be an extension of who you were to us to another person. In the process, bring glory to you and you alone. And Lord, I pray that this would be a safe place for broken people to find Jesus always. So Lord, like the early church, would you add to our number daily? With every head bowed and eye closed, if you're here and you've never prayed a prayer to invite Jesus to be your Lord and your Savior, then right where you're seated, you can simply say a prayer that sounds like this. Dear Lord, today I put my faith in you. I put my faith in your life, your death, and your resurrection, that your death on the cross was the payment of my sin and the promise of my eternity in heaven with you. Today, I choose to follow you. Would you accept my problems and my pain, my hurts and my habits? And would you help me to follow you in a way that brings both honor to you and to myself and allows me to be an example of the transformation that can only happen through Jesus?